Hey guys, so this is one in a couple of videos covering the settings that you have at your disposal in the Boom Explosions Toolkit. So I've just got a really simple level here with nothing much in it. That's just for demo purposes. This level is not included in the toolkit. There's a much better demo level. But anyway, so let's start off with the actual explosions actor. I'll delete that one. So this guy here is your main actor that you'll use with the Boom kit. So in order to make your own explosion, what you want to do is right click, create child blueprint class, and just give that a name. So we'll just call this example actor. Now the first time you open it, Unreal's going to open the full editor. I recommend just closing that and opening it again so you just get the settings here. Now what we're going to do, I'm just going to minimize all of these and we're just going to go through them one by one. I'm going to leave the projectile settings for now. We're just going to start with the settings. Actor tick is a category that I cannot hide that comes with the engine, so don't worry about that. So settings, the first thing we've got here is allow staged explosions. Now, I will just drag that over there and we will open up one of the ones the character is actually using. And I will just turn that off on the other screen. So, if I grab this sticky proxy mine, that's got a little bit too long being in activity. Just bear with me 5 seconds. Okay, let's try that again. Yep, that's better. So these are all, you can see they're in a line. Just gonna get a nice chain of them up. Now, so you can see there's a good line of them there. Now, the way the Unreal Engine deals with damage and stuff is it processes it all at once. So if I set off this one, they're actually all going to blow up, assuming they're in range of each other at the same time. Yep. So that's cool, like that's a chain reaction. However, personally, I find it a lot more visually appealing to have them go off in a chain. So I'm just going to set those settings back to what they were here, which is allow staged explosions, and it's set to 0.1, so it means a 1/10 of a second delay. So let's fire this up again, and now let's get our line of them going again. So there's a nice long line of them. Now if I trigger this first one, because we've set allow staged explosions, it's going to go this one, then that one, then that one, and that one. Which I think is a lot more visually appealing. It's actually better for performance as well, because rather than all going at once, you've got them running separately. So that's what that setting does. And the staged explosion delay allows you to control how long it is between them going off. So you can set it to be a very long time, very short time, whatever. You've got this inactivity period here as well. This is a period during which your projectile or your actor is invulnerable to damage. So if it's set to, say, 3 seconds, then it's not going to explode within those 3 seconds. Ignore owner is a setting most often useful for projectiles, but also good for mines. It allows it so that if a player puts it down, they can't trigger it. They can still shoot it, but they can't trigger it with proxy triggers or like it hitting them or anything like that. And this ignore owner time overrides that. So this is pretty useful with say a bouncy grenade that might bounce back at the player. You want it not to explode on them straight away because they're within range. But then after a second, if it bounces back and was to hit them, then it would explode. A fuse, pretty straightforward. If you've got a 5-second fuse, after 5 seconds it's going to explode. Now, one thing I will say before I go on is all of these have tooltips, so if you hover over them, it will give you a explanation of what the setting does. Now, the critical damage threshold, this determines how much damage has to be dealt in a single blow for it to blow up instantly. So it doesn't matter what the health of your actor is, if it receives this much, it's going to blow up. Explode on any damage is kind of the same, but with any amount of damage. So if you shoot it and do 1 damage, it's going to blow up, regardless of what its health is. damage required is the health of the item. So this is how much total it needs to accumulate in damage before it explodes. Obviously these two override that. And this setting just determines is how you switch between a projectile and a world actor. And we'll go over the projectile settings after. Sound and visuals are all pretty straightforward. So you've got your static mesh for what it looks like, an After Effect actor, which we will go through in another video, but essentially that's something that hangs around after the explosion happens. So a toxic gas on a gas grenade would be a good example of an After Effects actor. And location offset, if you want, say, let's take a look at this one. This one here has a location offset because you want the particles and the explosion to happen in the middle of the barrel, but the barrel's actually got the pivot at the bottom. So we've actually got a location offset here of 60. And if I move that around, you can see that's all moving. Now, so these are similar settings you've got for your 3 states. So when you have an actor, this one here is a good example. We've got this is just in its neutral state. It's not doing anything. If I do a little bit of damage to it, now it's in its damage over time, and it will continue accumulating damage before it runs out of health, at which point it'll hit a delay period, which is this one. And then once that's done, it will go kaboom. Depends on how long the delay is. There we go. And so here's an After Effect in action. We've got a post-processing and a sound, and there was a mesh there. You can set the meshes to hang around, but we'll go over that, like I said, in another video. So we've got damage over time was the smoke one. So down in here in the damage, we've actually got damage over time settings we'll go over, but during the damage over time, you can set up a sound, a particle, and scale that particle accordingly. Once that damage over time gets the actor down to 0 health, the delay kicks in, if there is a delay period. Again, we'll cover that after. You can set a different sound, a different particle, and scale that particle. So with the barrel, what you saw is smoke was the damage over time, fire was the delay. Then, obviously, once your delay is over or there is no delay, it goes straight to the explosion. You can set your explosion sound, your explosion particle effect, and your explosion particle effect scale. So that's the sound and visuals. Next we've got the damage. You can actually set the damage type. This is a pretty standard Unreal Engine function, but I've just exposed it here. So you can leave it on none if you want, or you can use specific types of damage if you wanted to do things like affect the player in different ways, or you wanted it to come up on screen and say player X died of gas poisoning, whatever it is. Excuse me. You've got your base damage. Now this is the amount it does at the explosion site. By default, everything in the explosion radius will receive this amount. However, most times you're probably going to want to turn this guy on, which scales the damage by distance. And if I jump back out of this level into the actual demo level, we can see a good demonstration of that in this room here. So we've got these 4 guys here, and they've all got little things down the bottom saying how much damage they received. So we watch them. You see the guy over here received around about 20%, 40, 60, and 78%. So it's just a way to, basically the further away from the explosion site you are, the more damage you receive. Ignore that, that's just because I've skipped through to the middle of the level. The damage obstruction method. This is 1, 2, 3, there's 5 different methods of, well 6 I guess, methods of telling the explosion how to deal with obstructions. So if there's a wall in the way, whether it goes through the wall, whether it only checks the origin of the actor is going to damage, or whether it checks to see how much of the actor is exposed. So for instance, using the bone trace method, it will actually check for all these bones, and if it hits 3 of them, then you will receive 7, you will receive 3/7 of the damage it should have received. And that works with the scale by distance as well. And that's just a way, Unreal Engine doesn't really have a good way of dealing with players hiding behind cover and receiving partial damage, so I've put that in myself. You can also set up permeable classes. So these are classes that will never stop the damage. So if you want to have, say, a glass wall, you can actually set it up so that glass never actually stops the damage going through it, but you could still have it break and that sort of thing. Now the actual explosion, the good stuff. The explosion radius, pretty straightforward. If you're within the circle of radius 1000 units in this case, you will receive damage. You've got cluster explosions, so we can come into here and we got a sticky cluster bomb. So this guy sits there for 5 seconds and then he'll explode into other clusters. And then they themselves are a completely different type of actor. So that's a cluster explosion. You can control the cluster counts, and that can be as many as you want. Bear in mind, obviously it will affect your performance. Cluster class, so this is where you set. So in that case we were using a sticky cluster bomb, but we were actually using the sticky proxy grenades as the cluster. So you can have a lot of fun with that. You should never set this to the same as this actor, because then you'll get an infinite loop, albeit delayed. And the cluster spawn offset, so in the example I just showed you, all those clusters were spawning at the exact same place, and that was propelling them out in different directions. If you want to have a different experience to that and use the projectile settings in here to control which direction they go and all that sort of thing, then you can use this cluster offset to spawn it differently. So if, let's say this is our bomb here, if the cluster offset is set to 50, it will go up to 50 in both the X and Y axis offset, positive and negative, so it randomizes to some extent. Next we have the proximity explosion, pretty straightforward. This is like a landmine or anything like that. All those clusters you saw, once you get within a certain range, it explodes. You can tell it what classes will trigger it. By default, that's set up for all characters, but you can set it up so that you have special projectiles that set them off, or whatever you want. Proximity range is how far the actors have to be, or how far the actors have to be within to trigger that explosion. Separate to that, we have the delay length, which is in those barrels, that fire period was the delay length. I think it was set to 5 seconds. So this is a thing, once your actor hits 0 health, there will be a delay. So this is good for, say, a mine, that once it hits 0 health, it starts beeping and then explodes. You have this option here of the damage overrides delay. Now if this is turned on, once it hits that delay, you can't do anything. You can't speed it up, you can't stop it, it's just going to explode. But if you have this one enabled, then if you were to cause damage to an actor while it's in its delay period, it will instantly explode. Damage over time, so this is, we saw the smoke effect on the barrel. Basically what happens is once you hit this threshold here, the damage over time threshold, if this is enabled, then it will start to take damage slowly. It will take this amount every this frequency. So in this case it will take 1 damage every quarter of a second, and that will bring it down to the 0 health level. And so this is really good for things that catch fire or whatever, like maybe you have a fuse box and once you shoot it, it starts sparking and you get boo noise and then it explodes. Physics, so this is pretty straightforward. If I grab this barrel here and just chuck it up in the air, I turn physics off on this instance, it's already off. If I hit play, that barrel's just going to sit in the air. Now I can't move it, but I can still make it explode. If I turn physics back on, then we see it drops to the ground. We can push it over and push it around. Now if we wanted it to act a little bit more heavy, so it wasn't quite as easy to push around, we have this setting here, which is the object mass. Now there's also options to propel players and physics bodies. So if I leave this guy on as a physics actor, and I make sure this one is set up to propel both, yep. We'll give it a bit of a bigger explosion force, so let's say 800, because my finger went on the wrong one. So this is set to propel both players and physics objects. Let's see if we can get on top of it. Yep. Okay, so when this explodes, both myself and that barrel are going to go flying. Come on. There we go, I died, so my explosion was a lot smaller, but you get the idea. So it allows you to explode actors away. And you can control that force with this setting here. There is also some debugging settings, so you can see where it is dealing damage to, what actors it's detecting, and they are all the standard settings in Unreal, as well as you can set the duration of that trace if you use the for duration setting, and the colors. These are default Unreal Engine functions. I've just exposed them to this actor for ease. Now finally we have the projectile settings. Now all of these settings will only apply if you have this setting here is projectile turned on. Otherwise, they're a complete waste of time. They're not relevant for barrels, they're not relevant for any of that sort of thing. So we've got this advanced hit detection. Now, Unreal Engine has a pretty decent physics engine, but there are some weaknesses. And if you have projectiles moving really, really fast, and I'm just gonna quickly grab this guy here and use a little visual aid. So bear with me a second. Okay, so let's say we have a projectile and the light blocking all this out. So you have a projectile, probably wouldn't be this big because it wouldn't be an issue otherwise. And it's flying along at pretty high speed, and so the way it works, it renders the projectile every single frame. So let's say on one frame it's here, but in the next frame it's here. Now depending on a lot of things going on the engine, it might actually not pick up on this hit, and that's obviously not good, because then your player's shooting a projectile, a grenade, whatever, and it goes through the world. You don't want that. So what we do with this setting here, use advanced hit detection, is every single frame, it is here, if it doesn't hit something, it stores this location. Then the next frame it's here, we draw a line from here to where it is now, and that way we can double check that it should have hit something. Now this isn't at all necessary on slower projectiles, and it's you only really want to worry about it on some, like on much faster projectiles, as well as things like sticky objects and that sort of thing. There's just nothing in the engine that I could find. There is a sub-stepping solution to it, but it doesn't really work. But this I found works 99% of the time. So that's what that setting does. Rotate by velocity simply rotates the mesh based on which way it's going. So if you have a missile, you want the missile always so the tip is pointed in the direction it's going. That's what this setting does. Explode on impact, pretty self-explanatory. If it hits anything, it will explode. Explode on player impact, this is not important if this setting's on, but if this is off, this will allow grenades to explode when they hit other players or other pawns. Sticky actor, pretty self-explanatory. Once it hits the surface, it sticks there. Sticky delay, that allows an actor to not stick instantly. So if you want it to bounce once and stick, or you want to make sure if your player has some like mesh on them that sticks out of it, you want to make sure it's not going to stick to that, any of those sorts of things, then you can use this. Sticky offset, so this one is, let's say this is your projectile. I should have kept the other one before. Make this 0.25. So because the pivot here is in the center of the object, I think it's right there, what's going to happen when this gets stuck is Unreal Engine is going to put it right there. So if you want, you can use the sticky offset and make it go there. So all you do is you just work out how far off it is. So this is a 1 meter by 1 meter or 1 meter radius diameter sphere. So that means when we scaled it down, the distance from the center to the edge is 12.5 centimeters. So you just set this to 12.5, and that would always have it sticking there. Your initial speed. So the rest of these settings here, I will go through them, but they are settings from the Unreal Engine projectile component. So initial and max speed, pretty self-explanatory. It's how much it spawns with and how much it can get up to. Gravity scale, leave this at 1 if you want gravity to affect your bullets normally. If you want it to affect less, you lower it. If you want something like a rocket that isn't affected by gravity, you turn it to 0. Whether the projectile should bounce or not, and how bouncy it is. So by default this is at 0.6. That means it will maintain 60% of its velocity after a bounce. Friction, how much friction affects your projectile, whether it's a homing projectile, and the homing acceleration. So that's the overview of the explosions actor. I will be going through the After Effects actor in a separate video. I know this is kind of lengthy, but I wanted to get a little pretty detailed. If you have any questions, please let me know and I'll get back to you. Cheers.